Hello and welcome to Carnivorist Chats. My name is James, your host. I started this podcast to help other folks share their own healing stories and to interview thought leaders and experts in the carnivore, keto, and low oxalate space. Before we begin, I'd like to give a shout out to Equip Foods and the Carnivore Bar. As an affiliate, you can use the link in the show notes to get a discount on their products when you check out using the code Carnivorist. Thanks in advance for listening, subscribing, and any likes or shares. And now, on with the podcast. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Carnivorist Chats. Once again, it's James, your host. Today's guest is very special to me, and I'm sure will be special to you, the listeners, because I'm blessed with the presence of none other than everyone's favorite neurosurgeon, the plant-free MD, Mr. Meatitarian, Mr. No Grains, No Plants, No Problems, the one and only Dr. Anthony Chaffee. Dr. Chaffee, what an honor it is to have you as my guest today, sir.
Well, thank you very much. That was a very flattering introduction. I appreciate it.
Well, if you just allow me the privilege, sir, of just giving you some more kudos, I just want to let the listeners know how impactful you were specifically on my journey, coming from a vegan background where I was very, very sick at sort of the last days there, and having a resource to be able to listen to. Your How to Carnivore series was so impactful for me and so helpful on my journey. I really credit you and amongst other folks as well, but you specifically on explaining in very easy and simple terms to the listeners in ways that are approachable and really helped me out of my situation. And I really thank you once again for doing all that you do.
Well, I'm really glad that helped. And that means a lot to hear that. And I'm glad that it helped you out. And I mean, that was the whole idea. You know, I've seen this help a lot of people, and I've seen it help me, and I've seen it help my family, and I just wanted to sort of share that with people, and I'm glad that I was able to explain things in a way that worked for you, and you were able to get a lot out of it. So that's great. Thank you.
With that being said, Dr. Chaffee, the listeners know obviously my reason for doing what I'm doing now and putting podcasts together and having folks like yourself on, because I said to myself when I was at my sickest, if I find a way out of this mess, I'm going to make sure that I at least help others that may be struggling and in a very dark space to understand and have something to listen to, because it was literally podcasts. I couldn't do much else than listen to podcasts and figure it out. This was all going on during COVID initial lockdown. I couldn't get to the hospitals or anything like that. So what prompted you, Dr. Chaffee? I know you've told the story before, but to really, as a a neurosurgeon, to get this message out to folks. I know you had some things in your past that you overcame as well through the carnivore diet.
Yeah, well, I've always been very interested in diet, nutrition, and how that affects health, and obviously as a doctor, how that affects disease. I think this is something that we don't appreciate enough, but actually isn't all that far-fetched. And we talk about fat cholesterol causing heart disease or this not causing diabetes. And I think that is correct, that there are certain things that we're doing environmentally or doing to ourselves, smoking and cancer and emphysema and also heart disease as well, and alcohol causing its effects and harmful deleterious effects on the body. So we understand that things that there are things that are damaging our body and that a lot of these diseases can actually be preventable. I just think they're from something else. I think it's from something else that we've been talking about and told about, because for the last 40 years we've been told it's one thing, and people have listened to that, and they've actually reduced the amount of fat, cholesterol, and meat that they've been eating, increased fruits and vegetables significantly, and also increased processed foods, to I think a great detriment. And seed oils over triple, and high fructose corn syrup over triple the amount of consumption that we've had in America since the 70s, and all these diseases have increased dramatically as well. And just looking at that as a doctor, and you want to help people and you want to get them well. How do you want to do that? Do you want to just paper over symptoms and just sort of pick up the pieces after they've crushed themselves, or do you want to prevent it from happening in the first place? I think that ethos is what should be. I think that should be, you should strive to attain that as a doctor, to actually help your patients attain health. And so this is something that I've recognized as getting to the heart of the matter, that underlying all of these different conditions and just, eating right or losing weight, it comes down to the fact that we are animals biologically, and that what we put in our body makes a massive difference. And if we go outside of what our biological appropriate diet is, then we can get sick. And just like animals get sick, and zoo animals, if you feed them what they don't eat, they get sick, and they get what's called human diseases, and dogs and cats get human diseases. Livestock and animals in pastures, if they run out of forage or feed, they might eat other plants that they aren't designed to eat, and they get very sick as well. And we even have names for these diseases. And I think it's time that we recognize these diseases in people and in dogs and in zoo animals as that they're eating the wrong thing. And I think if you address that, then you address about 85 to 90% of the healthcare issues that are impacting the world. And we can get back to the simpler time when you were dealing with traumas and accidents and childbirth and delivery and infectious disease and things like that, and poisonings, which I think this lumps into. I think we're being poisoned, we don't even realize it. And if you're treating a disease, it's very different than when you're treating a poison. If you're treating a poison, maybe you have some medications that help, but the main thing is to get the poison away from the person and stop them from being exposed to that toxic element. And so I think that's the most important thing that we can do. And since I've recognized that, I just thought this was too big. I thought this was too important. I found myself talking to my patients and colleagues and just literally anyone who would listen to me about how important this was. And I was spending hours and hours and hours that I didn't really have in the office, talking to people. You're supposed to have 7 to 10 minutes talking to people. I'd be spending 45 minutes talking to people about their nutrition and health and lifestyle, because it was important. And I felt it was something that could help them, and, for specific people in specific circumstances. And, I just sort of looked at this, and I've always sort of thought that maybe doing a YouTube channel or something like that would be a good idea and sort of get my ideas out there. But then when I was really treating more and more patients with this, and I was sort of having the same discussion over and over and over again, I was like, there has to be a quicker way. I should probably just do something about this. And so I finally put together a YouTube channel, started making videos, and then I could say, okay, hey, there's the idea. Why don't you watch these videos and you can sort of see what I mean? And so that was my way of trying to help my patients and try to get them information that could potentially help them, without having to sit there for 6 hours each patient and try to get it out there. They could sit on YouTube. So that was my idea, was to help my patients and to help more people as a result of that, and really just to get the word out there. This isn't my job. I'm not like a YouTuber influencer sort of thing. That's not my day job. My day job is in the hospital and treating patients there and in the office. But I think that this is something that can affect, thousands of people, millions of people around the world, if enough of us are doing this, and can potentially help reverse a lot of serious harm that is preventable. I think a lot of this is preventable. A lot of the diseases and illnesses that we treat today as a mainstay in modern medicine are entirely preventable, and not only preventable, but reversible. And I think that once we recognize that, healthcare as we know it will change for the better, and will literally free up trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars that we're using in healthcare to treat diseases that aren't diseases, they're poisonings and exposures. And we don't need to spend that. We can take that money and people can use it for something else more worthwhile. We don't have to spend all this money on processed food and garbage. We can put that towards real food that can actually help ourselves, help the environment, help the world around us. And I think that overall, this is going to make everyone's lives better and make the world a better place. It's very, flower and roses and things like that, but I really do believe it, and I think the evidence is there to back it up.
One of the things that really struck me early on, and we can sort of move into this area, is something that you said. And as a plant-based vegan at the time, because I'm getting the pushback that I never was truly vegan, because if I'm eating meat now, I couldn't have been vegan. I don't know what to say. So one of the things that you said was chronic diseases are a combination of toxicities and malnutrition. And I can
Mhm.
certainly say from my perspective that I experienced both of those. You can see clearly I was malnourished, and it took literally, as I'm trying to explain to folks, changing what I put in my mouth impacted my physical and mental state so profoundly that it caused me to want to do this to get the word out there. And I often talk about it was a combination. I first came across Sally Norton and her work on plant toxicity and specifically oxalates, and I thought, man, I must have been doing this wrong. And then I found Dr. Baker on Rogan, and I said, okay, I can sort of grapple with the idea of adding meat back. But then when I found you, which sort of combined both of those perspectives, and as I say, it was very easy for me to listen to in my brain fogged state that I had at the time. I really want you to touch on now that specific point, the combination, these chronic diseases you talked about that you want to alleviate by doing what you do are that combination of toxicities and malnutrition. How does that come about?
Yeah, well, that was sort of the idea that I was talking about, where alluding to zoo animals, if they're not fed what they're supposed to eat, and dogs and cats and so forth, and livestock, when they get into plants that are not designed to eat, they can get sick as well. This is because all animals, and humans are animals. We didn't just come out of nowhere. We the same biological laws apply to us as they do to other animals as well. And if you have an animal and they eat what they aren't designed to eat, they can actually get quite unwell. The reason being is because there are a specific complement of nutrients that they have to have. Different animals, there are different essential nutrients to different animals, and you have to have them. They're essential. And so essential meaning that you can't really make them, or you don't make enough of them, and you need at least some of them, if not the entirety of your supply from them, of them coming from your food, the food that you eat and intake. So that's first of all. And second of all, any animal eating a plant that it is not designed to eat can run into trouble, because plants are living organisms as well, and they like to stay living organisms. They are really the dominant life forms on this planet. About 99% of life on Earth are plants. And they have to be able to defend themselves because they're under constant assault by animals and insects and fungus and so on. So they have specific defenses because they are stationary. They can't run away or fight back like animals can. Animals don't want to be eaten either. Nothing wants to be eaten necessarily as an organism. And so animals can defend themselves kinetically. They can fight you. They can run from you. They can hide. But plants can't. They can't do that. They are just sitting there. And a tree can grow up and get its leaves out of the way of terrestrial animals, but that's not going to take care of everyone. And so one of the main defenses they have is by being chemically toxic. They have these toxic chemicals, that can act in various ways. They can disrupt your hormones. They can block nutrients. They can bind to different nutrients, so that even if you eat certain nutrients, they will bind to that irreversibly, and we can't break the bond, and it'll just pass through our system. They'll disrupt our hormones. They can block protease. There's protease inhibitors and things like soy and wheat make it difficult to extract protein from what we're eating, and the list goes on and on. Plants make around 1 million different chemicals, and nearly all of them are to stop animals from eating them. So what does this mean? This means, going back to 7th grade biology, literally I was taught this in 7th grade biology, that plants and animals are in an evolutionary arms race. Plants becoming more and more poisonous, so less and less animals can eat them, so they can survive and thrive. And then animals becoming more and more adapted to specific poisons in specific plants, so they can eat that plant and survive and thrive. And that's their dedicated resource. They don't have to fight for resources like a koala. They just eat eucalyptus. Almost nothing else eats eucalyptus because it's toxic. And, cows eat grass, but they don't eat all grasses. Most grasses will kill them. This is why you can pasture sheep and cows on the same paddock, because they eat different grasses. And so they're not competing for resources. And so, if a cow starts eating, like sorghum grass or something else, it will get a specific illness. It will damage them in specific ways because it doesn't have the biomechanics to detoxify those defense chemicals safely for the cow. And the sheep is different. They can eat different things. They can die from eating some plants that a cow eats, and vice versa. So if you're not in that evolutionary arms race, you're in trouble. And so a lot of carnivores or carnivorous species, they are less and less and less and less adapted to eating plants. This is why dogs and cats, or dogs specifically, they can eat very few plants safely. I mean, we think about this, think about edible and inedible plants, right? Most plants on earth are inedible to humans. What does that mean? That means they're poisonous, they're toxic, and to an extent that they can kill you. Then the edible plants, does that mean that they have no poisons in them? Well, no, of course, because those are inedible to most other animals. And a lot of plants that we eat are inedible to dogs or cats. And, like chocolate can kill a dog in not that high quantity. Tomatoes and tomato leaves in particular can be very toxic to dogs and cats. And cats are even worse. Cats can eat even less plants that are much more toxic. And is why they call them obligate carnivores. They really can't survive eating plants. They have to have meat. So when you talk to any zookeeper, they can tell you that if you feed an animal something that it doesn't eat in the wild, something it didn't evolve on, it gets very sick. But what does it get sick with? Because the same thing as we do. It gets obesity, heart disease, liver disease, diabetes, cancer, autoimmune issues, arthritis, and so on. Dogs and cats, known carnivores, and yet we give them grain and plant-based kibble, and they get the same things. And in fact, veterinarians are now saying that there's this large rise in so-called human diseases in the domestic pet population. Why is that? Is that because they're catching diabetes from us? Are they catching cancer from us? Are they catching Crohn's disease from us? These aren't human diseases. This is a demonstration of that toxicity that I was talking about. They're getting toxic exposure to something that they are not biologically adapted to break down and detoxify safely. And so they are getting toxic. They're getting toxicities, right? So, in ancient Rome, they had lead pipes. And for a long time, they had no idea that they were getting lead poisoning. They just thought, okay, well, something's happening. We don't know what it is. And then someone figured out, okay, this is coming from the lead or whatever we're using to use these pipes to move this water. There's something going on there. Okay, let's change the pipes around. Okay, now we're not having a problem. There you go. So for a long time, they thought that was something else. Okay, well, now we're in our lead pipe era. Okay, because we are thinking that there's something causing diabetes, there's something causing autoimmune issues. It's just genetic. You just have it. Okay, well, if it were just genetic, then why have the rates of diabetes increased by 6-fold in 40 years? Why has heart disease tripled in 40 years? Why have stroke rates tripled? Why have cancer rates tripled in 40 years? And autoimmune issues and Alzheimer's and things like that increased dramatically as well. Autism, they said, well, we just weren't paying attention because everyone born before 1986 was an idiot, and they just had no idea. They couldn't tell that someone was so had such difficult social and learning skills. They just whatever. Well, maybe, but we were keeping track after the 80s and the 90s when people made that claim and said, well, we probably weren't paying attention before. Well, then they increased in the 90s and the 2000s and the 2010s, and they're still increasing now. So, well, that doesn't explain that. So something else is happening in our environment. Our genetics did not change. It cannot change that fast. Anyone who's taken genetics at a university level will understand population genetics and understand that cannot happen like that. That brings me all the way back around to your original question, which is what the hell is going on? And I had this sort of epiphany a few years ago, and I just sort of realized that the diseases that we treat as the mainstay in modern medicine, all the chronic diseases, that these are not diseases per se, but these are toxicities and malnutrition. Toxic buildup of a species inappropriate diet and a lack of species specific nutrition, namely too many plants, not enough meat, because all the best evidence shows that humans have evolved into and have lived as carnivores for at least the last 2 million years, and we're close to it before then. And in many areas, they were exclusive. Our ancestors and even modern day, tribes and civilizations are eating exclusively animal products. And some places maybe ate a mix and a combination. It was usually because they couldn't get meat. And that, historically, even in the modern era, and since the agricultural revolution, that was also the common theme as well, that people that could afford it got meat. And the people that couldn't afford meat or didn't have access to meat because they were peasants or serfs or slaves, they were just given, gruel and plant-based sort of things to flesh out what they were eating. And generally they were in much poorer health because we've only been eating meat, or predominantly been eating meat, and I mean, you think about it, like in the ice ages, where were the plants? Where were the plantains? Where was the grain? Where were the apples? Where was the fresh asparagus when people were crossing the land bridge from Asia over to North America? There wasn't any. They were going across ice flows and things like that. There was nothing growing up there, and they were eating meat, exclusively meat, in a lot of these areas. Now, people may argue, oh, well, they had a combination of this, that, and the other. Yeah, maybe some people somewhere, sometimes, but there were many, many areas that there simply were not plants available at all at any time. And if you look at the the historical record of different explorers and settlers in Australia and North America, it was very clear. They were talking about the natives and how they exclusively ate meat. And maybe they knew if they had, couldn't get a kill or something like that, they knew which plants they could eat during, a famine or a shortage in food. But in general, they exclusively ate meat, and they were quite good at hunting. That's how they survived. And so they would just do that. So because, going back to, seventh grade biology, you're in that evolutionary arms race. If you step out of that arms race, the other side keeps building up, and you're not. And so, you're stuck in the Middle Ages, and your opponent has nuclear armament, right? That's not going to work. You're not going to win that. And so that's where we find ourselves now. We're now eating these plants that we simply don't have the mechanics to break down, perfectly. Some people can survive on this stuff, and that's fine. And that, I think, that's provided us with an evolutionary advantage, a survival advantage in a lot of areas, because, like a feline, they can't, they have to eat meat. They don't get meat, they die, right? We have a bit more a robust nature that we can survive, with other things. And that's great. That gives us a survival advantage. That does not mean that that's optimal. And so I think that if you are looking for optimal health, then you go for what we biologically are designed to eat. And I think that that's very clearly meat. And there's actually proof of this in the literature. There's a reversible nature of a lot of these illnesses. Type 2 diabetes has been shown with clinical trials, with large number of randomized controlled trials, to be reversible with a ketogenic diet. Reversible, meaning, okay, so ketogenic diet, you're removing carbs, you're removing grains, you're removing all the things that come with those carbs, grains, and sugar, and diabetes goes away. Well, that means that diabetes is not a disease. That means it is a toxicity from carbs, sugar, alcohol, all these different sorts of things. Because you remove that, it goes away, right? That's that relationship. And then in autoimmune diseases, there are a number of studies with Crohn's disease. We put someone on an elemental diet where you remove and eliminate out, just go down to just the bare nutrients and nothing else. It's like a shake, it's highly processed, but it's just the nutrients, right? So it's nothing else. You put them on that, it is a better treatment for an acute flare-up of Crohn's disease than prednisolone, these major steroids that just completely suppress your immune system. That's amazing, right? So just not eating those things are a better treatment than the steroids, basically. So like fasting, you fast for a few days, you get the same sort of result. But you can also eat meat. You can also eat what you're designed to eat, and you'll have the same results. And I see this in my clinic and office literally every day. And there was another study with Crohn's as well. And it was a randomized controlled trial where they had people eliminate carbohydrates and fiber, and contrasted that with a group that didn't. They kept eating carbs and fiber. The group that just eliminated carbs and fiber, nothing else, they found that they stayed in remission from their Crohn's disease on average 51 months. Contrast that with the group that was still eating carbs and sugar, and they stayed in remission on average 0 months. Okay, so that's a big difference. Okay, and the only difference was they just weren't eating carbs and sugar. What does that mean? That means the carbs and the sugar are contributing to the damage and the expression of autoimmune diseases such as Crohn's. And so you have that reversible nature. You have that clear toxin toxicity relationship. And I think that goes far beyond just diabetes and Crohn's. I think that applies to most, if not all, of the chronic diseases that we treat nowadays.
As always, Dr. Chaffee, I mean, just the way you frame things and present them, really easily digestible, no pun intended, or all puns intended, I should say. I had the good privilege of talking with Charles Maddox the other day, who I know you're very familiar with, and we were talking about the
Yeah.
diabetes angle and his perspective and why he's doing the reverse carnivore series, yourself included. Sort of folks that don't particularly believe in this way of thinking, and that diet can have these profound effects, would argue that, and I like to think that I've seen all your interviews, because, and I'm probably the one that clicks your thing the most. I watch them twice, maybe three times, because there's always a jewel in there. But I hadn't actually
Thank
seen
you.
your recent interview with Thomas DeLauer, when you guys talked about, or he asked you the question of the folks that say, well, these toxins give the hormetic stress, that it's important to have that. And I thought you answered that so perfectly. I mean, people will say that the dose makes the poison, but why are you still wanting to eat the poison? That's what really clicked
Mhm.
with me when I listened to you. I'm like, if I really truly want to heal, and you should be aware that part of my most severe condition when I was very sick was my doctor did think that I had colitis or diverticulitis or whatever it was. I could not get tested because they found a bacterial infection in my gut as well.
Mhm.
But she was very convinced that I was bleeding constantly from my bowels,
Mhm.
and it was very severe. And what caused me to lose weight, get down to 127 pounds, very emaciated and sickly looking. But since I've gone carnivore, my digestion has never been better, never been better. So it really speaks to that, eliminating
Nice.
most of that stuff. It's just been groundbreaking. So what do you say to those folks that, oh, well, humans were designed to eat the plants, and what you're essentially saying
Mhm.
is, like those animals, we are obligate carnivores. Is that what I'm hearing?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I suppose it depends on who's defining the words and what your definition of them are. So, I mean, just in simple terms, if you look the stuff up in the dictionary, a carnivore is just something that just eats meat, or mainly eats meat. Okay, well, that's me. All right, and so I'm by that definition, I'm a carnivore. Omnivore is something that just eats both, and an herbivore that just eats plants. Okay, so it's very simple definitions. And then people then go into obligate, scavenger, carnivore, and all these sorts of things. But there are things in meat that you have to have that you cannot get from plants as humans. Okay, and there are no nutrients in plants that you have to have that you cannot get from meat. So what does that mean? That means you are obligated to eat meat. You have to eat meat to survive. And okay, well, you can take supplement. Well, we definitely are not supplementivores, right? So those supplements did not exist 50,000 years ago. They did not exist 300,000 years ago or 500,000 years ago, when our ancestors were turning into our, Homo sapiens sapiens, which came around about 300,000 years ago, 350,000 years ago, depending on who you ask. Um, so those didn't exist. So we had to have been eating something that was there. So, when we're talking about what you could do and what you could survive on, that's a very different discussion on what we evolved on and what we're biologically adapted to eat. And that is meat. We are biologically adapted to meat. And by that definition, we are obligated to eat meat. I would say we are obligate carnivores, because you can't survive without meat. You take supplements, fine. But if you're taking supplements, by definition, your diet is deficient. And also you're bringing this along with a lot of different plant toxins and things like that, which do cause harm. People say, they bandy that phrase around, oh, well, what about hormesis? What about it? Have you proven any hormetic effect? There's, again, 1 million different chemicals that plants make. Do you have them categorized on how much is safe for humans? How much is hormetic? Because the idea of hormesis is, it's something that can potentially cause harm, and traditionally does cause harm, but in certain levels, before you get up to, again, dose makes the poison, right? So before you get up to that dose, that poisonous dose, maybe you have a benefit, maybe, not necessarily. Not everything harmful has a hormetic before and then a harmful after. That's not true. You cannot say that about every single chemical, unless you can prove it. But I don't think anyone has done any of those studies, let alone for the million different things that plants have. So you'd have to talk about specifics. You'd have to talk which chemicals are hormetic. At what level are oxalates ever hormetic? At what level? And what level is too much? Okay, how much is in spinach? Is that too much or too little? And how much spinach? Is it 1 ounce, 2 ounce, 3 ounce, 10 ounces? Okay, so maybe 1 ounce is okay and 3 ounces not okay. You have to show that. Okay, now there's hundreds of other things besides oxalates in spinach. Which ones are hormetic and at what level? Are they hormetic at the same, level? Like, so that 1 ounce of spinach gives you exact hormesis at all these things. That makes no sense. The likelihood of that is zero, right? These chemicals, these defense chemicals, were made by these plants hundreds of millions of years before humans existed. And they are going to be here hundreds of millions of years after we are long gone. We, these were not designed for us. They didn't come up with caffeine 200 million years ago or whenever it came into existence as an insecticide neurotoxin, which is what it is, to then go like, oh, you know what, this is just going to help. These little monkey things don't exist yet, but you know what, in 500 million years they're going to be here, and I want them to have a good morning, and so I'm going to make this. That is not what they're making this for. They are making these toxins to be toxic. They do not want you to eat them. They die if you eat them, and they will defend themselves with your life if they have to. And then you have to realize no animal on earth eats the variety of plants that we do at the moment. None. Okay. Even animals that exclusively eat plants, they eat a very specific selection of plants. Some only eat one plant their entire life. Some eat a few others, but they're usually in the same class or family of plants. They're not going outside of that, because they don't have the defenses, because different families of plants, different classes of plants, they make different toxins, they make different defense chemicals. You may not have those protections against those defense chemicals. And so whatever plant that an animal is supposed to eat is something they've been eating for thousands of years, well, not thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years, millions of years. It takes a long time to build up these defenses. What plants are we eating now that even existed 50,000 years ago? I don't know of any. All of these things have been hybridized, they've been bred, they've been treated, they've been used GMO genetic technology to change them into something else. We have toxins from one plant that we can put into another plant to stop a certain insect or pest from eating it. It increases crop yield, so you don't have to spray chemicals on them. The chemicals are inherent in the plant, and that's something we've known since the 1980s, that the plants make 10,000 times more pesticides and insecticides naturally than the pesticides we spray on them by weight, and that the naturally occurring pesticides and insecticides that animals make, that the plants make, that our produce makes, are, in the case of mushrooms, are 500 times more likely to cause cancer in one study that was done comparing them to alar by Professor Bruce Ames of UC Berkeley, which people can look up. I've listed it in many of my talks. So none of the plants that we eat now are anything that existed. The fruit that you look at an original mango, it's all seed and just very fibrous, barely any sort of sugar in it. Apples, little crab apples, not the same thing as big, Red Delicious or something like that. And so, corn is very different than it used to be. And the people in Mesoamerica that first cultivated corn, they knew that you had to treat it chemically and go through, this chemical production industrial process to detoxify it, and also to break some of these bonds and to release some of these nutrients for like niacin. There's a ton of niacin in corn, but you can't access it because you can't break the bonds, because that's another way that they defend themselves. They put their nutrients locked up in different chemical bonds that are very difficult for animals to unravel. And we don't have the biomechanics to break a lot of those bonds or all of those bonds. And this is where bioavailability comes in. And so if something's not bioavailable, it's because you are not designed to eat it. And so that's another indication that we are not designed to eat these things, because we don't have the natural innate ability to detoxify them and extract the natural their nutrients, right? Because we didn't evolve. If you need an outside process to do that, then obviously you don't have that innate process, meaning you did not evolve on it. You're not biologically designed to eat it. That is definitional. And you talk to people and you point out that the WHO, they're very pro plant-based diet. They have an entire webpage talking about all the different natural defense chemicals that plants use, categorized. They have names, furanocoumarins, cyanogenic glycosides, all sorts of mycotoxins, all sorts, just tons and tons and tons and tons of these things. And they talk about lectins, in beans and like in kidney beans. And kidney beans are toxic. People eat kidney beans all the time. But if you don't specially prepare them, if you don't soak them for a certain period of time, if you don't cook them for a minimum amount of time, at boiling, they can be toxic. And in fact, on the WHO website, it even says that as little as 5 kidney beans undercooked and not improperly treated can put you in the hospital, right? So that means we are not designed to eat kidney beans because we cannot detoxify these things properly. Just jumping back to the corn thing, there was a whole epidemic of a disease called pellagra, which was killing people all across Europe and probably in the Americas as well, that were reliant on corn, and that's a niacin deficiency because we're not able to extract niacin from the corn. But corn has a ton of niacin, and so people in Mesoamerica didn't have that problem because they were able to put this through this process called nixtamalization, which is where the word tamale comes from. And they're able to extract the niacin and detoxify it a little bit. So they were able to more safely eat this stuff. And, but that again is just another indication, another clear piece of hard evidence that we are not biologically adapted or designed to eat these plants, or really any plants. And so, it used to be, like an ethical thing, saying, hey, I don't really like how animals are being treated. I don't like the fact that they're being used for food. That doesn't make me feel good. I don't want to partake in that. Fine, that's your business. But now this audacious claim that, not only is it unethical, it's completely ridiculous because we're designed to eat plants. We're actually herbivores somehow. Like all those cave paintings of salads and, like gardening and things like that, I guess that tipped them off, like that's something that has never, ever been talked about in any serious scientific conversation. And look, that's fine. You want to put that theory forward, but you're going to need a large body of evidence to back that up and support it, because right now, for thousands of years, the entire body of evidence, of hard evidence, shows that humans have been eating meat nearly exclusively, or at least predominantly, forever, or the entire history of humanity. And so, I think that that's a bit of a massive stretch, and the evidence is so clearly against it. All the evidence show that humans have been eating meat for a long time. Cave paintings of hunting, bones and clear evidence of tools, stonework tools chipped into bones that we see in the fossil record going back millions of years. Evidence that people taking stones and smashed open skulls going back like 4 to 6 million years ago, right? And the stable isotope studies showing basically the exact food chain, and showing that humans have been on top of the food chain for tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years, millions of years. So, that doesn't make much sense that we would just not have been eating meat this whole time. And in fact, we've just been eating fruits and berries and twigs. And it's just recently that we've just decided that meat was the answer. That doesn't make any sense. That makes no sense. And in fact, it's only since we recently incorporated so many new plant products and started going away from meat that all these diseases started becoming much more prevalent and much more harmful. So again, it doesn't fit with the observed phenomena. It doesn't fit with the data. It doesn't fit with our biology. It doesn't fit with our physiology. And it doesn't just make basic logical sense. So they can make that argument if they want to, but the evidence is totally against them.
Dr. Barry the other day tweeted just a simple one-liner, and it just went as things from Dr. Berry tend to do. He just put the vegan diet is unprecedented in human history,
It
and
is.
it just went boom, as you can imagine,
Yeah.
and it just speaks to what you were saying. As a neurosurgeon, and you're in residency now in Australia, we often talk about the benefits, and certainly for me, I noticed it tremendously, the physical side, but I like to talk about the mental side for carnivores, the mental benefits coming from a highly toxic and malnourished background. What have you seen in your work in terms of things like Alzheimer's risk and strokes and benefits for the brain? And we know a dear friend of ours, Brett Lloyd, who cured his depression. I was depressed.
Yeah.
They wanted to put me on antidepressants a few years ago when I was sort of at my worst. And looking back at my photos, you can clearly see I was. You've just recently done in your book club, Dr. Palmer's book, which is
Mhm.
groundbreaking in terms of the effects on the brain. What have you seen clinically in the brain and carnivores, the benefits?
For psychiatric conditions, Dr. Palmer is a professor of psychiatry at Harvard University. He's been doing actual large clinical trials and is showing that you can reverse schizophrenia, OCD, bipolar, major depression with a ketogenic diet. Carnivore diet is a ketogenic diet, right? And so this has many reasons. One, you're removing a lot of toxins that mess with people's mental state. And a major one that he goes into detail in the book, Brain Energy, which I think is an excellent book, very well written, very well researched, very well presented, and a master class on how mitochondria work and how they affect disease and your mental state. And that's what a ketogenic diet does. When you eliminate carbs, you lower your insulin, and your body starts getting back into the metabolic state it's supposed to be in. It's not a starvation state. It's not a stress state. You're not stressing your body because you're starving. No, that is our primary metabolic state. That is the primary metabolic state of nearly every animal in the wild. They run on fat and protein. Animals do not run on carbs. Even herbivores that just eat a bunch of fibrous plants, they break that fiber down into short chain fatty acids and protein. And that's what they absorb. So they eat a bunch of fiber and they absorb fat and protein. And so carnivores eat animals with fat and protein, and that's what they get. And then herbivores that eat fiber and are able to break this down, do the same. They absorb fat and protein. Another reason why you know that we're not herbivores and shouldn't eat fiber is because we don't have the ability to break down fiber like every other herbivorous animal that eats fiber. There are no animals that eat fiber without the ability to break down fiber. And we don't have that ability anymore. We've lost that. Our appendix is, vestigial. Well, it used to be a 4-foot long cecum, and that's where fiber would pack into. And we haven't used that trait for millions and millions and millions of years. And so we lost it. It shrunk down. Maybe, it does some other things, maybe, but it doesn't do that. It does not, store a whole bunch of fiber and break it down into short chain fatty acids and protein. So we've lost that ability. What a ketogenic diet does when you get into the metabolic state that you're supposed to be in is that, well, it does a lot of things, but it's, we have a lot of studies showing that, like fasting is really good for you because it's good for autophagy. It can sort of recycle these sort of older cells that aren't working as well, but it can also recycle the organelles inside the cell, like the mitochondria, and recycle them and make them anew and replace them and refurbish them so that they work a lot better. It also stimulates the production of more mitochondria. So there have been studies with ketogenic diet and long-term fasting, and then saying, okay, well, we won't like long-term fasting. This isn't really fun to do. Well, can you have a fasting mimicking diet, a diet that puts you in the same metabolism as we call fasting metabolism? You have the same metabolism as when you're fasting, you eat this basically fat and meat, no carbs. And they found that, yes, you do get all of these same benefits. And if you're on a ketogenic diet for a number of months, they found that you have 4 times the number of mitochondria, and they are 4 times as effective. So you have a massive boost in the functionality of your cells. And mitochondria are much more important than people think. They don't just make ATP. They actually physically move around the inside of your cells, and they run your cells. They go to this organelle and they release ATP to make it go. And then go here. And it's perfect timing. They have thousands of these, tens of thousands of these, hundreds of thousands of these in some cells. And it's very important for these things to work extremely precisely. And when you're talking about in your neurons, and they're running around and they have to go to a specific spot and release ATP to make it release neurotransmitters to send a signal to another set of brain cells. It has to be perfect. If you're there just a little slower and you don't make quite as much ATP, the phrase "a day late and a dollar short." That's not great when you're talking about the functionality of your brain, right? And when you're talking about thousands of these, hundreds of these, hundreds of thousands of these in anywhere from 400 billion to 2 trillion brain cells, you're going to be in a problem. You're going to have a problem when you compound that and you make these things less effective and less numerous. You're not going to get the functionality that your brain and your body needs. And so that's something that Dr. Palmer found, that you put people on a ketogenic diet or a carnivore diet, and he's done both, that you will improve the health of their mitochondria and their metabolic health overall. And this actually seems to fix schizophrenia, because, as he argues, and I agree with him, schizophrenia and other mental health disorders, and even cancer and diabetes and a lot of these other issues that we're just calling chronic diseases, and oh gosh, we just don't know why, but here, take this pill. These are all metabolic diseases. Most of these from the level of the mitochondria. Cancer, certainly. I mean, that was shown by Otto Warburg 100 years ago, or nearly 100 years ago, that cancer was a metabolic disease of the mitochondria, and that if you have healthy mitochondria, you can't get cancer. That was something that Warburg showed. He's a Nobel Prize winner in cancer. People can look up his hallmark paper, 1951, titled "The Origins of Cancer." And then Watson and Crick came out with DNA, and everyone just said, DNA is everything, forget everything else, DNA is everything, DNA is the end all be all. Well, that's not the case. The DNA is the blueprints, but the mitochondria are the architects and the builders. They use the blueprints to actually run your cells. And when they shut down, when they go on strike, doesn't matter what the blueprints say, things are going to go haywire. So that's very reassuring for people that are suffering from these horrendous mental health disorders. It gives them some hope. Medications don't always work. I think only like 10% of medications actually, give full efficacy to people. Other people get middling results. A lot of people don't get any positive benefits from these things, and they get a bunch of side effects. And counseling as well that can help. But we don't have really great treatments for these things. And now we seem to have something that really helps, because Dr. Palmer and Georgia Ede and Rachel Brown, Dr. Rachel Brown in the UK, these are all psychiatrists that are doing studies with real people and showing clear evidence that putting people on a ketogenic or a carnivore diet can actually reverse these diseases, which is absolutely amazing for these people. Stroke rates have gone up; they've tripled since the 1980s, and we blame that on saturated fat atherosclerosis. However, the Journal of the American College of Cardiology just published in 2020 a large paper, literature review, and position by a number of people that were very much against saturated fat. Now they've basically sort of written a sort of a mea culpa, saying like, hey, we got it wrong. They said that going through all the literature and data on saturated fat, they can find no correlation between increased saturated fat intake and heart disease. Not even a correlation, right? And you can't even prove causation from correlation. But if you don't have correlation, that proves there is no causation, right? So best evidence right now from the best medical journals and best cardiology journals in the world are there is no causative link and no association between increased consumption of saturated fat and heart disease. But interestingly, they found an inverse relationship between saturated fat intake and stroke rates. So people that ate more saturated fat had lower rates of stroke, and vice versa. The less saturated fat someone ate, the higher their stroke rate was. And they concluded that there was no upper limit on the amount of saturated fat that was safe to consume, and particularly to do with their cardiovascular health. So these are things that people need to know about. These are devastating. I see people, in the hospital all the time that get major strokes, and they have major bleeds, and we have to decide, is this person going to make it? And if we do operate and they do make it, are they going to have any semblance of a normal life afterwards? And would they want that? Would they want to be in a home, brain damaged and crippled for the next few years until they die? That's something you have to talk about with the family and figure out on a case by case basis. But it's never a nice discussion. It's never a nice situation to be in. Someone having a massive stroke and their brain swells and it's going to kill them. And so, okay, we have the same conversation. Okay, well, we can decompress that. We can take that bone off and let that swell, but that doesn't mean that he's going to live. And if he does live, that doesn't mean he's going to ever be the same. So obviously we need to think of better solutions than picking up the pieces after it's already happened. And this is something that we can do, very clearly, that you eat more saturated fat, your risk of stroke goes down. We've been told the exact opposite for the last 40 years. And what happened? Stroke rates went up by a factor of 3. Okay, so that didn't work, right? That's not helping people. And now we're picking up the pieces and scraping off, scraping these people's lives up from the ground. And that's devastating. People don't realize that we don't have good treatments for these things. Sometimes you get a clot in there, you get there soon enough, you have interventional radiologists get in there and pull that clot out. Great. That's a miracle. That's amazing that we can do that now. Can't always do that for all people. What if it's a hemorrhagic stroke? What if it's a bleed? You're not doing that. That's just done. It's just ripped out huge pockets of damage in that brain. And you can take the blood out, but you're not going to fix the tracks and all the different different areas of the brain that you've damaged. That's just that either heals or it doesn't, and it usually doesn't. Maybe heals some of it. All of these things are much better to be prevented than to treat it after the fact. Thankfully, things like psychiatric disorders, they can be reversed. Strokes, not so much, right? However, I did actually just speak to someone the other day who had a subarachnoid hemorrhage, stroke, bleed in the brain 30 years ago when he was 17 years old. And he had right-sided weakness. He was very weak, very unbalanced, had a very difficult time mobilizing and going up and down stairs. He had to just cling on because his right side was weaker, and to cling on to the banister to help himself up that way. And with his left hand, because he was so unstable on the stairs, he was just petrified of falling every time he went up and down the stairs. 2 months on carnivore, and his mobility issues were gone. His weakness subsided. 30 years of stable neurological deficit, and this guy all of a sudden can walk again. And he's asking his wife. It's like his wife actually knows. It's like you're actually walking different. Like, look in this video. You're very unstable. You're very unbalanced. You can you're not moving very well. You're walking normally, and he still has some weakness, but he says that he can run up and down stairs now. That's remarkable. That is remarkable. That's not supposed to happen. You ask any neurologist or any neurosurgeon, say like, okay, I had a stroke 5 years ago, and this has been my neurology this whole time, or 30 years ago. Is this ever going to get better? Yeah, probably not. You can get physical therapy, occupational therapy, and you can sort of, get something back. But there's a limit, and if it's been stable for the last 30 years, it's probably not going anywhere. So this actually had a remarkable improvement. So that's amazing. And I'm seeing just amazing things, and people just having these some very profound recoveries. And I always tell them, will this help this, and will this help that? I'm like, okay, I don't know. We don't have data on this, but this is, I believe, we do have data on the fact that this is our biologically appropriate diet, and this is the best thing that we can eat, and this will optimize your health. And so whatever you have, this will optimize it, and I do believe that we have evidence for that. And, and then just, so either way, even if it doesn't help your specific condition there, it'll help you in 1,000 other ways. And so it's worth a try. It's worth trying out and getting those other effects. And, if it helps you with that thing you're worried about, that's a bonus. I've even spoken to doctors like Dr. Kiltz, who is saying that there are people, that there are case studies with people with Huntington's disease that are like reversing their Huntington's disease with a carnivore diet. That's insane. I thought that was like, purely genetic. Like if you had that trait for Huntington's disease, like you would get Huntington's no matter what. I thought it was like 100% penetrance or near to. Apparently, this is also a genetic predisposition and environmental trigger, which I think is astounding, because it's a devastating disease. And then just lastly, I'll touch on dementia and Parkinson's and Alzheimer's and things like that. That's devastating, entire generations of people like never before. I mean, you just look at the sheer number of people that were in nursing home as a percentage of the elderly population. Before the 1950s, it's nothing compared to what it is now. People lived and died at home, and very rarely people would have to go into a nursing home. Very rarely. Now everyone does. It's just like you get past 70 and it's just, well, time to put mom in a home. That's it. And but there are studies that actually show that people with higher LDL cholesterol is actually protective against dementia and Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, right? And that there was a study, an interventional trial, putting people on the high-fat ketogenic diet who had Alzheimer's, and they found it was a better treatment for Alzheimer's than every single medication that had ever been trialed for Alzheimer's. Okay, now, admittedly, the medications for Alzheimer's are garbage. They're not great, but at least there's something, and it's better than anything we've ever been able to figure out pharmacologically, right? Literally just got a message today from a friend of mine who's a family practice doctor here in Australia, and she said that she works with a geriatric population, and there was a gentleman who's 86 years old, and he was having a lot of different health issues, and sort of decided he couldn't maintain an independent lifestyle, and he had to go into basically like nursing care facility, assisted living, nursing care home. And it was basically, he was going there to die. He couldn't take care of himself anymore. And he was just sort of slowly declining or quickly declining. And thankfully, he came across, some of these talks, and he decided to give carnivore a try, sort of a last ditch attempt at salvaging his health. And now he's off all his medications. He's going to the gym 3 days a week, lifting weights and swimming twice a week. And he's back home independent. 86 years old, that's not supposed to happen, but it is happening. And so that is a very typical story. I see that quite a lot. I saw that in my parents. My parents were not doing well. Now they're doing fantastic. They're in their 80s, and they look like they're in their 60s or maybe even their 50s, and they're doing remarkably well. I interviewed a lady, Maggie, from Canada. She's a rancher. She's been a strict carnivore for over 65 years and a rancher for over 65 years. She's 82 now. She still works 14-hour days in blizzards on Christmas. She was telling me just last Christmas, she was out there, with the cows. It was negative 40 degree weather. And it was a blizzard, and she had to care for the cows and care for the babies. And so it was like, there was no Christmas. There was no Boxing Day. It was just 14 hours of backbreaking labor. She's 82 years old. She looks like she's in her late 40s, maybe, and so, and she still is working. She took over a plantation down in Colombia that was, sort of going under, and her and her husband bought it as a sort of a way of saving this farm. And it's they have, bananas and coffee and things like that. So at 82 years old, she is climbing up 30 feet into banana trees and plantain trees and cutting down these large bunches of bananas and plantains, and then hiking them up a hill on a dirt track, to be able to then put in a truck and take to market. At 82 years old, most 20-year-olds aren't going to be able to do that these days, right? She's 82, okay, and she has no medical issues. She's on no medication. She never goes to see the doctor. She has to do a physical once a year, just because she has a commercial driver's license, and so she has to do that, and she passes it every year, because she's in perfect health. And that is what you should expect of someone in their 80s, because we are genetically designed to live on average 120 years or more. And so at 82, you're still middle-aged, and you should still be healthy, and you should still be active, and you should still have a life that is meaningful and productive. And I think that if we are able to spread this around and get people, eating what they're supposed to eat, I think they can achieve that as well.
I feel like I should take this mic off and just drop it right now. That was awesome. And just 2 points on that. I know there was a conversation you had with Sally Norton, Dr. Chaffee, where your eyes were opened a little bit with her talking about how oxalates also affect you from the mitochondrial level because they affect cell function. And it really was an eye opener for me. And the second one is, and I'm sure you follow this gentleman or may have interviewed him. I can't recall. I know Dr. Baker did, and our mutual friend Casey Ruff did, is Hal Cranmer from the Paradise for Parents, where he owns retirement homes in Arizona, and he's feeding his residents now a carnivore diet, and the profound effects on these older people that he's seeing through doing that. I'm actually interviewing him coming up, and I can't wait to talk to him because it's so important. With that being said, Dr. Chaffee, we'll do some rapid fire because I really do want to get to these questions and make sure I'm honest with your time. This is sort of a nice segue. The very first question that came across to me from a listener and a fan of yours is, do you think that, and I know the answer to this, do you think that carnivore is then for everyone? Is it for everyone?
For every human, yeah. And so if you consider yourself among the human species and the Homo sapiens sapiens, then yes, I think so. You won't find any examples in the wild of two members of the same species that have a different optimal diet, right? You may find two different members that have more resistance to species inappropriate diets, like our European ancestors who had agriculture 8 to 10,000 years ago. We've developed some resistances and ability to detoxify these things a little better than, say, the Native Americans, Sub-Saharan Africans, or Native Australians, who get far sicker eating a so-called Western diet than Westerners. And this is something that we noticed for hundreds of years, that there were these so-called diseases of the West, and then people from the West would get these diseases that other people simply. And now we're sort of doing that with dogs and cats. We're like, wow, we were getting these human diseases. Dogs don't get human diseases. Now they're getting human diseases. Well, when people started eating a Western diet, they started getting Western diseases. What does that mean? That means the food is causing the disease, because when they don't eat the food, they don't get the disease. And we eat the food and we get the disease, we just get it at a lower rate, right? So that means we have some resistances, but it's not good for us. If you were less poisoned by lead than I was, that doesn't mean that lead's good for you. It just means that lead is less poisonous for you, and it's not hormetic anyway. So, all the members of our species will have the same optimal diet, just like there's the same optimal diet for dolphins and peregrine falcons and whales and elephants, of that species. Like, we are Homo sapiens. We are very specific genetically. We have been very similar genetically for the last 300,000 years. We're very strongly genetically conserved in that time. Some changes, but not all that much. So yeah, I think that this applies to everyone.
Dr. Chaffee, just remind me, how long have you been consistently carnivore for now? That's a question from a listener as well. They're just wondering.
Most currently about 6 years, just nothing else. I started 23 years ago when I took cancer biology and learned how toxic plants were and how carcinogenic they were and how they had, dozens, if not hundreds of carcinogens. And my professor was just like, yeah, like, I don't eat plants. I don't eat vegetables. I don't let my kids eat vegetables. Plants are trying to kill you. And I was like, right, forget plants. And I just stopped. And so I just went to the store and was just like, everything has plants in it. What the hell do I eat? And I just came across eggs and meat. And I was like, all right, eggs and meat it is. And I ate that for a solid 5-6 years. And then I was in the UK and playing rugby there. And just, some of the meat was sort of breaded, had crumbs on it or whatever. And I was like, ugh, is that big a deal? Is it so much more convenient to buy this than the other things? And so I just sort of convinced myself that it wasn't that big of a deal. And it was a big deal. It made a big difference in my health and performance and how I felt as an athlete. And more importantly, it was the crack in the dam that now that I wasn't as strict, like, I'm not eating any plants at all. Now I started eating a little more plants and a little more plants and a little more plants. I never was a big processed food junk sort of eater. I always ate, mostly ate whole foods. I don't normally cook myself, and it was predominantly meat. I always ate that. And so, for the next sort of 10 years, I ate mostly meat with some vegetables and carbs, sort of like whole food carbs that I would prepare myself mostly. And then sort of 6 years ago when I came, sort of saw Dr. Baker on Rogan and really realized like, no, wait, hold on. Biologically, we are carnivores as a species. That's just the kind of animal that we are. And I was like, right, I knew it. I knew plants were trying to kill me. Get rid of these stupid things. And I just stopped. I just stopped eating veggies, and I started eating a lot more meat. I started adding in the fat because now the research had come out saying that fat was not bad for you; it's actually good for you. And I felt that just like 1,000 times better than I ever had, except for that period in my early 20s. And so yeah, so but consistently 6 years, and it's, I mean, going on 100, because I have no intention on going back on that, unless I'm starving to death. And there's something people ask me too, is like, is it ever a good idea? Are there any plants that would be good to eat, or a good idea to eat in any circumstance? And it was just like, yeah, if you're starving to death, it's a great idea, but apart from that, absolutely not. I would not touch those things. And I would encourage other people not to either.
I had Jane Buxton on recently, and she had a laugh when I told her I have, like you, no desire to eat any more plants. I ate enough of them in my past life. I don't
Yeah.
need to eat anymore. Dr. Chaffee, another question is, I think the listener was wondering, do you still salt all your meat, and are you using salt currently?
Yeah, I use less and less salt as I go. I actually stopped using salt for about a month just to see, because there are a lot of long-term carnivores that don't use any salt, and they actually swear by it. They think that actually makes them even better. It gives them more health effects and benefits, and they think that salt is, unnecessary on a carnivore diet, but actually, detrimental. That it can be sort of addictive, and you are sort of crave it and go after it. And I don't know about that, but it makes sense that we don't necessarily need to use it. There's a lot of populations alive right now that don't use salt and live as carnivores, and plenty of people, from America and elsewhere, that have been doing carnivore for decades and don't salt at all. So I don't think there's any need to salt. I don't think you have to on a carnivore diet. I do just by preference, just because when I salt my meat, I put it on like drying racks and sort of dry it out a bit. And I find that the salt helps dry it out a bit, helps it brown better, and gives it a nice flavor. I was doing that without that, and it worked fine. But I liked it just a little better with the salt. But I did it like for a month without, and I felt great. I don't think you need to use it. I just do it just because of that technique that I use. But yeah, you definitely don't need to, I don't think.
By the way, I have to thank you for that little tip. That was one I learned early on: the racking and the salting, the dry aging in the fridge, the 24-hour.
Yeah.
Man, it made a tremendous difference. I just love it now. I got some brisket in there now.
Nice.
This ties into the next question, Dr. Chaffee, and it's a good one. For those folks with low blood pressure, will carnivore make it worse?
No, no, it should normalize things. It should make things better. It depends on what's causing your low blood pressure as well. That's usually abnormal. Like, normally people have a problem with high blood pressure, don't they? And that comes from a number of different things, or a number of different potential things. But a very common cause that we're seeing now is actually insulin resistance. And so you just like, you can reverse diabetes, type 2 diabetes, with a ketogenic diet, which a carnivore diet is. You can do the same with blood pressure. And so, your insulin resistance is coming down, and now your arteries and things like that are more expansitile. They can expand and contract in keeping with the volume of blood that you have. And so it doesn't just increase pressure, because it can't increase the volume to lower the pressure. And so that people find that they come off their blood pressure medications pretty quickly. Low blood pressure, there are less things that cause low blood pressure. Generally, it's like, you're hypovolemic. You don't have enough water. You're very dehydrated. You've lost a lot of blood. There's something where you're losing fluid into other tissues. You go into shock. Like septic shock, where your body's sort of sequestering water out. It's leaving your vessels, and your blood pressure drops, because just all this water is going out, and you're getting this insensible loss. And so, that's something that hopefully you're seeing a doctor about. If you're having low blood pressure, quite often it can be fixed with just more water. Quite often it's just a bit of dehydration, or you get hypotensive when you stand up too quickly. It's called postural hypotension. That quite often is from dehydration as well. And sometimes it's just as we age, our vessels aren't as compliant, and we get these hardening of the vessels, and that can also be helped with this sort of thing as well. And then the other issue is if you're on too many medications, you're on different medications to drop your blood pressure. Well, maybe you just don't need to be on as many of those medications, and you should talk to your doctor about, hey, maybe I should come off of these things because I'm getting really dizzy and lightheaded. And especially if you go into a carnivore diet or any ketogenic diet, you probably will have to talk to your doctor about coming off medications like blood pressure medications, diabetes medications, certainly, and potentially other medications like psychiatric medications. We've been using a ketogenic diet for 100 years to treat epilepsy. And now people are just rediscovering this because we've just papered over the past 100 years with pharmacology saying, it's easier just to prescribe a pill than to give somebody diet and lifestyle advice. And it's hard for people to stop eating carbs. They just love them because it's so nummy. Okay. But you haven't tried. You haven't even tried to tell people that there's an option besides taking medications that can cause harm and have side effects, and that a lot of people don't like taking. And every time I tell somebody, hey, by the way, there's a ton of research that shows that a ketogenic diet can actually be really helpful. They go like, what, really? Like, wow, absolutely. I'm going to get all over that. They're excited to hear that there's something that they can do to help their situation. So like so many other things, once you start eating properly and your body starts working properly, you don't need all these medications to sort of keep the wheels from falling off. So, sometimes it can be too much. And so definitely be in touch with your doctor about lowering medications potentially if you need to.
The next one is very nuanced, like that last one. And the lady was, she's nervous, and I understand why she messaged and asked if I could ask this for you. She said she's a lean and small woman who started carnivore 9 months ago to help her gut issues. She's concerned about liver damage because her ferritin levels have gone up quite high. I mean, she said she had an AST that increased from 21 to 36 and ALT from 10 to 46. Should she stop carnivore for liver damage concerns?
Yeah, I need to know a lot more about her. Unfortunately, you don't normally see liver function tests go abnormal on a carnivore diet. So I need to know exactly what she's eating, what other medications she's on, what else she's doing, and what else is in her environment. Yeah, when I take people's labs, like their liver function tests get better. They don't get worse. So something's happening. You can take a look at. If her ferritin level is going crazy, ferritin can be an acute phase reactant as well. And so if somebody has increased inflammation or an infection or something else is going on, their ferritin can go up as well. So that needs to be addressed. That needs to be thought of. Maybe she has some sort of underlying condition that maybe can be showing its head at the just now. Certainly with the liver issues, that needs to be thought about. And so obviously see a doctor about that and get tested for, hemochromatosis and see if she has that genetic variant. It's very abnormal for someone to run into problems like these just from not eating poison and eating what we're evolved to eat. But at the end of the day, whatever is happening. So, just try and see, check with your doctor to see what's going on. If your ferritin is getting too high and you need to transfuse or, give blood basically to lower your ferritin rate, then, maybe you have to do that. It could be that this is just sort of, hemochromatosis sort of, rearing its ugly head. In speaking to Dr. Baker, because I don't treat hemochromatosis and it's rare enough that you don't really come across it all that often. But Dr. Baker has collected, over 12,000, medical data and literature for over 12,000 patients at Rivero Health. And he's getting more and more every day. And he was saying that he's actually seen people with hemochromatosis who have to do bloodletting and give blood every few months to lower their iron levels, actually improve on a carnivore diet. So it's something metabolically, biochemically that's going a bit haywire in those circumstances with people that have that genetic predisposition that is causing them to hold on to too much iron. So it's tough to answer that question wholly. It is something I think she needs to see her doctor about and talk to, because there could be something else going on. I don't think there's any reason that a carnivore diet just just whole meat, fatty meat, and water, nothing else, would cause the problems that she's having. So I would definitely encourage her to get something checked out. But I don't think that not eating poison is causing these problems, which is what eating plants are. And I don't think that eating what she's biologically adapted and designed to eat is causing them either.
Next one is an interesting one. The best way to build muscle and what to eat before and after a workout, in your opinion?
Well, from my experience and what I've noticed is that it's much better to not eat anything before working out. Certainly before a big competition, if you're an athlete and you're doing some or even taking a test. I mean, if you eat a whole bunch of whatever, you're going to divert a large amount of your blood supply to your intestines and digestive tract to break this stuff down. That's blood that's not available for your brain and your muscles. So it puts you in a rest and digest mode. It slows you down, makes you tired, and all that sort of stuff. So that's not a great thing to do before you work out. So I always trained fasted. I always played on an empty stomach. And I was always told people, you always play hungry, and that sort of like has that killer instinct. I need to go and kill a gazelle and like beat a lion to death or something like that, or else I'm not going to eat. So you have that sort of edge. And that's how I sort of thought about it. And that's sort of a funny way of thinking about it, but just physiologically, it makes sense to me as well that, because you have all these different processes that happen after you eat, and it's better to not do that. So, just like anything else, just eat meat, just drink water. And so I wouldn't eat anything before and afterwards, just eat meat. So, I think, there is evidence, that gets thrown around, the sports physiology and sports medicine circles, that you have this anabolic window sort of 30 to 40 minutes after you work out. I haven't really looked too deeply into that research, but that's something I've been told by my sports medicine doctors and trainers for various different professional sports teams that I've played for. And they're very much into that. So, that may be the case. And so I wouldn't eat anything before. And if you're going to eat something after, I wouldn't waste your time with protein shakes and all that sort of stuff. If you're just eating meat, you're going to get a ton of protein, and you're not going to get all the nasty sugars and sweeteners and artificial sweeteners and artificial ingredients that are going to come with it that you don't want. And so, yeah. So I would just eat meat afterwards. If you're going to eat at all, that's usually what I do. And the best way to build muscle is just working hard and eating a lot. So your hunger and your demand for food and nutrients are going to go up if you're working out, especially if you're working out at a high performance level, and you're really pushing yourself. You're going to increase the amount of food that you need to take. You may not be able to get those in at one time. So I find that, just on a normal sedentary day where I'm just going to the hospital or the office and home, I eat about 2 pounds of fatty ribeye beef. And that seems to maintain my, 230-pound frame, and when I'm working out and pushing myself, I double that. And so I'll have to eat twice a day. Normally I can just eat 2 pounds in one sitting and I'm great. Now, I sort of get 2 pounds, maybe a bit more, 3, and I'm just like, oh, okay, I'm stuffed. And then the next day I'm like, yep, actually I'm still hungry. I want to do something. And so I'll eat another pound and a half or something like that. And then that night I'll stuff myself again. And so I find that if I'm able to get the time to work out, which is not always the case, and I'm able to eat enough, I can put on weight extraordinarily easy. To the point that most people hearing how quickly they would just be like, must be steroids. It's not steroids, it's not TRT, it's not anything like that. It is 100% diet. And I've never put on muscle faster, lean body mass faster than when I'm on a carnivore diet. And that's compared to myself as someone who's played high level professional level sports for years and years and years and years and years. And for instance, during COVID, I couldn't work out at all. And I only had time to work out sort of like a couple times a month if I was lucky. And, I could have done more, but, I just got into the routine of working, and I wasn't in the routine of working out. And then COVID hit, and I was just like beside myself. I'm like, no, that's not going to work for me. And now, even though I was only working out once or twice a month, it was like, I'm freaking out. Like I have to work out. And I was just pissed because I couldn't work out. So as soon as the gyms opened, like I was there the first day they opened, like got a new gym membership, and I was there, and I was like, right, I'm going to go back on my professional schedule my lifting schedule when I was playing rugby professionally, and I was just there, and I was there at least 4 days a week, if not 5 or 6, and doing that and eating enough, eating till I was full, and like until meat stopped tasting good, and doing that twice a day, I was able to go from, let's see, I remember in kilos, but I was 102 kilos, and then I went up to no, sorry, I was 92 kilos, and I went up to 105 kilos in 5 weeks. All right, so that's 25 pounds. So I put on 25 pounds of lean body mass and didn't put on any extra body fat in 5 weeks. And that's, I'm like, that's impossible. You can't do it. Well, I did, and so, maybe that's because you have a big frame. And so weight goes on pretty easily. And, maybe it's a bit of beginner gains because like I have the frame. I've been 270, I've been 275, mostly muscle. And, but definitely with that as well. And so maybe it's easier for me to put muscle back on. I don't know. All I know is I put on 25 pounds of lean body mass in 5 weeks. And that's how I did it.
I'm smiling because, we were talking offline about when I posted my before and after picture. And Dr. Chaffee, I turned 50 this year. I'm not apologetic about that. And I feel better than I did 20 years ago. And
Awesome.
of course, all the haters were like steroids when I put my, I'm like, never touch the stuff, but make no mistake, there's hard work involved too. You got to work, but it primarily is what I changed was what I put in my mouth. And I've never been able to put on size and mass this easily. And it segues into the very last question a little bit. How can folks that have that carb addiction, what is the best way? And I know the answer to this, but I'll let you curtail those carb cravings that are struggling.
Well, I mean, carbs can be addictive. Sugar, fructose is addictive. That gives a dopamine response to the addiction centers of your brain, just like cocaine, heroin, and meth. And so this is a drug, and we need to treat it as a drug. And just like a drug, you have to withdraw, and you'll have cravings. But just like other drugs, you have withdrawals and cravings. They go away if you're able if you're able to stay away from them. So for the first couple of weeks, you might have these sorts of cravings, but you can temper them by just eating meat and just eating enough fatty meat. And if you're satisfying your body's demand for nutrition, then you'll find that your cravings are much less. And sometimes actually, because our hunger signals are so much more subtle on a carnivore diet, because when you're eating carbs, it actually deranges your hunger signals. You eat glucose and your blood sugar goes up. That makes your insulin go up. And that, insulin forces energy into cells. It doesn't allow it to come out of cells, right? So now you have to run on the sugars that you're eating as opposed to mobilizing your fat stores and making blood sugar and making glycogen and making ketones. But it does something more insidious than that, which is insulin blocks leptin, which is secreted from your fat stores that go to your brain and say how much fat you have, how much energy you have. And so now you're getting a signal that you have zero energy reserves because your insulin's blocking leptin, and fructose also blocks leptin. And your blood sugar is going down because insulin stays up. And so, it stays up for about 24 hours, and now your blood sugar is going down too low. And so your brain goes panic and says, hey, we don't have any energy and our blood sugar is dropping. So we can't replenish it. And so if you don't eat, you're going to die. And this is why we go, oh my God, I have to eat. You panic eat. And you get these cravings. I have to eat, I have to eat, I have to eat. And we think of that as hunger. That's not hunger. That's a pathological starvation state where your brain thinks you're starving to death. And you feel like it, and it's a horrible feeling. I remember it. I do not remember it fondly. When I was first doing this 23 years ago, I had no idea about this. No one explained that to me. I had to figure all this stuff out for myself, and so I had no idea. I had no idea when I was hungry. I would go 3-4 days without eating. So I was like, I really haven't eaten in a few days, but I'm not hungry. I'm not hungry. I don't feel hungry. But I was just like, okay, I haven't eaten in like 3 days or 4 days. I was like, I should probably eat something. And then I would eat, a whole bunch of beef and eggs. And I'm like, this is amazing. And I just like devour it. So I was definitely enjoying that, but I just did not feel hungry the way I had in the rest of my life. So that can be carb cravings as well. If you get carb cravings, you're like, oh my God, I really want carbs. That could be your brain telling you, eat something, idiots, like, let's go. And because that's how it knows that's a hit of energy that it knows that it used to get in the past. And so you get that sort of craving. So anytime you get a craving, I would just think, okay, am I hungry? Is my body telling me I need to eat? And just try eating meat. If you get cravings to eat something, but eat the right thing. Eat meat, eat eggs, drink water. And if they taste good, I think taste is a good marker of hunger, because you get that positive feedback from healthy meat, and your body says, we want this. And the good thing about that is that your positive feedback is lower and lower the less your body wants it. And then eventually your body says, no, we're good. And you get any positive feedback. And you just go like, I'm not really enjoying this. I don't really want to eat this anymore. And you just stop. But as long as meat is tasting good, as long as you're not eating carbs, and as long as you're not on medications that will artificially increase your hunger, I think that almost everybody can trust their hunger, can trust that signal. And so as long as meat tastes good, you can keep eating. And so I would say, if you get, eat enough so that you don't get cravings. And if you start getting carb cravings, then ask yourself if you're hungry. Try eating. If meat tastes good, you're hungry, keep eating until it stops. And eventually they'll go away. Your brain will, recognize that's not where we get energy. That's not where we want energy. And you'll get over the addiction to sugar and carbs. And you won't have carb cravings again, unless you really undereat. And then you might say like, that bread smells amazing, But, when I go through a bakery, if I'm hungry and I go into a grocery store, I can smell the bread. I can smell the donuts. I'm like, oh, those smell good. When I've eaten something, I go into a bakery, I can't even smell it. It's not registering, And I've noticed that. I was in Chicago with my cousin and his family, and they were going to a bakery and getting some treats and some sweet pastries and things like that. Couldn't smell it. Could not smell a thing in there. And I was just like, these things just not have any odor? Like, why am I not smelling this stuff? And so I was like, yeah, no, it's there. But it wasn't registering in my brain as anything my brain wanted anything to do with. And, I think that most people will get there after a few weeks. So just stay strong and just, eat enough that you don't get cravings.
Dr. Anthony Chaffee, it has been an honor and a privilege, sir, to talk with you today. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I know my listeners will too. They say every day is a learning day, and man, I learned today. I love it. And I just want to thank you again, sir, for all that you're doing in this space, for your time today. And, I wish you nothing but the best. Where can folks go to find you, Dr. Chaffee? And I know we were talking before, and you've mentioned this on other podcasts, that you're in the process of writing a book, which I'm very excited about. When can folks expect that?
Well, thank you very much for having me on. It has been an absolute pleasure. I really do appreciate you having me on, and I just appreciate you letting me know how much this has helped you, because that's why I do this. It does take away from my day job, and it is difficult, and so it's nice to see those positive stories, and that does make it worth it. And so thank you for that. On social media, I'm most active on Instagram. It's just Anthony Chaffee, MD. So Chaffee spelled CHAFFE. And same thing on YouTube. So it's just Anthony Chaffee, MD. And my podcast is called The Plant Free MD. And as just stemming back from my origin story, coming onto carnivore from my professor, that was absolutely not about plants. As far as the book is concerned, I hope to have it out in this year anyway, and I've made some arrangements to sort of take some time off from the hospital just so I can focus on writing. And so I'm in the process now. So I'm a couple chapters into it. I've sort of mapped out all the chapters, everything I want to say, and now it's just a matter of getting it all on paper. So I'm in that process anyway, and I hope that I can get it out in the next 6 months, but we'll see.
Well, as you always eloquently put, Dr. Chaffee, it's not my birthday today, but it sure feels like it, because I'm about to go tuck into a ribeye.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, it does though, doesn't it? Like, every birthday, like that's your special meal. You get like this special thing that you don't have to feel guilty over. It's your day. Every time. That was just a big steak for me, with like some béarnaise sauce or butter or something like that. And that's always what I wanted. And that's always what I had my mom make for me when I was growing up. And now it just feels like my birthday every day because I just have a big birthday steak every single day and I don't have to eat any stupid vegetables. It's great.
Dr. Chaffee, have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks again, sir. Get some well-deserved rest. And thank you again for taking the time out.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
And that's a wrap on this episode of Carnivorist Chats. If you've made it this far, I want to say thank you for listening, and also thank you in advance for liking, subscribing, or sharing this episode. Thanks again to the good folks at Carnivore Bar and Equip Foods. Don't forget to check the link in the show notes to get a discount on their products. And also, don't forget you can book me for a 30-minute carnivore coaching session. Again, the link will be in the show notes. Until the next time, be well.